Beneath a quiet little town in the heart of New Zealand's North Island, there was a fault line that no one had ever seen move. Not once. In more than 200 years of written records, going all the way back to the early 1800s, before the instruments, before the science, before anyone was even keeping track. This particular patch of Earth had never produced a single recorded earthquake. It was, as far as the historical record was concerned, silent, safe, unremarkable. And then, at 4:51 on a Saturday morning, while nearly everyone in the region was asleep, that silent fault broke. And it broke hard. A magnitude 5.9 earthquake erupted from just 9 kilometers beneath the surface, shallow and violent, and it shook the central North Island so severely that more than 22,000 people were jolted awake and rushed to report it. And here's the part that should genuinely make you stop and think. This was not the famous fault everyone fears. This was not the giant everyone watches. This was a fault that almost nobody knew was dangerous, in a place that was supposed to be quiet, and it announced itself for the very first time in recorded history with a strong, frightening blow. So today we are going to look at this earthquake from an angle most people never consider. Not just what happened, but what it reveals, the unsettling truth that in one of the most studied, most monitored, most earthquake-aware countries on Earth, the ground can still surprise the experts. We are going to talk about hidden faults, about why this one caught a whole district off guard, about the aftershocks that scientists say could rumble on for years, and about the quiet secondary dangers that these quakes unleash that most people completely forget about. And by the end, you are going to understand something important about living on a restless planet that goes way beyond New Zealand. No fear-mongering, just the real science and the real lesson. Let us dig in. But before we do me one quick favor. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever lived somewhere you thought was totally safe from earthquakes only to be surprised? Or if you are in New Zealand and you felt this one, tell me where you were and what it was like to be shaken awake in the dark. I read every single comment. And if you want to be the first to know the moment the Earth moves anywhere on the planet, subscribe right now. It is completely free. Hit that like button too. Let us push for 5,000 likes on this one so the algorithm gets it to the people who need to understand this. All right, let us get into it. So let me set the scene properly. The earthquake struck near Taumarunui, a small town in the rugged, green, sparsely populated King Country region of the central North Island. It hit at 4:51 in the morning, centered about 5 kilometers from the town, at a shallow depth of just 9 kilometers. GeoNet, New Zealand's official geological hazard agency, rated the shaking as severe. Within an hour, close to 23,000 people had filed felt reports. And remember, that number only captured the first few minutes. One of the duty seismologists pointed out that the true number of people who felt it, once you count everyone in the hours afterward, you could easily run into the high tens of thousands. The shaking radiated out across almost the entire North Island, felt in Auckland far to the north, in the capital Wellington to the south, and even across the strait into the top of the South Island. For a magnitude, 5.9, a strong but not catastrophic quake, that is a huge footprint. And the reason comes down to two things: how shallow it was and where exactly it struck. Let me start with the where, because this is the heart of today's story. When the seismologists looked at their data, they said something remarkable. This was the first earthquake ever recorded in that specific area since record-keeping began in the early 1800s. Think about what that means. For the entire span of documented New Zealand history, this spot had been quiet. And the region itself has only a few mapped faults, the known charted cracks in the crust that scientists have identified and can point to on a map. The scientists said this quake may have ruptured one of those few known faults, or it may have broken on a fault that was barely mapped at all. Either way, the event was a normal faulting earthquake, the crust being pulled apart and dropping down, which is the typical style of movement for this stretching part of the country. So, in that sense, it was not geologically bizarre, but it was, in the most literal way, unprecedented for that location. A fault woke up and spoke for the first time in living and recorded memory. And this is where the lesson becomes bigger than one town. Because New Zealand is not short on faults. The country sits directly on the boundary between two great tectonic plates, the Pacific and the Australian, and it is being squeezed, stretched, and torn by their collision. The land is stitched together with faults, thousands of them. Scientists have mapped a great many of the major ones. But here is the humbling, honest truth that this earthquake drives home. They have not mapped them all. They cannot. Many faults are buried deep, hidden beneath layers of rock and soil and river sediment, invisible at the surface, revealing themselves only when they finally rupture. A quiet region is not necessarily a safe region. It may simply be a region whose faults have not moved recently enough to be noticed. And if you think that is just theory, let me give you the perfect real-world example. because New Zealand has already learned this lesson in the most painful way imaginable. Back in September 2010, a powerful magnitude 7.1 earthquake struck near the city of Christchurch on the South Island, and it ruptured on a fault that scientists did not know existed. It had no name before that day, because no one had ever identified it. They named it afterward, the Greendale Fault. That hidden fault, buried beneath the flat farmland of the Canterbury Plains, had been silently loading with stress for thousands of years, completely unseen. And when it let go, it kicked off a sequence of earthquakes that, 5 months later, would produce the devastating aftershock that killed 185 people in Christchurch. That entire catastrophe began with a fault that was not on any map. So, when a strong earthquake erupts from a quiet area near Taumarunui, out of a fault that had never been recorded moving, the scientists do not shrug it off. They recognize it for what it is, a reminder that the map of danger is incomplete, and that the Earth holds secrets we have not yet uncovered. Now, let me come back to that second factor, the shallow depth, because it is what turned a hidden fault into such a rude and violent awakening. This earthquake ruptured just 9 kilometers down, and that is genuinely unusual for this particular district, which makes the whole event even more of a surprise. You see, most of the large earthquakes that happen under the Central King Country actually occur extremely deep. There was a magnitude 6.2 quake in October 2018 that struck this same general area. But it ruptured more than 200 kilometers down, deep inside the slab of the Pacific Plate that is sinking beneath the North Island. When an earthquake is that deep, its energy has to claw its way up through 200 kilometers of rock, getting absorbed and softened along the way. So it arrives at the surface as a broad, gentle rolling motion. But a rupture, just 9 kilometers down, has almost nothing between it and the towns above. It delivers its energy straight up, concentrated and sharp, like a hammer blow from directly below. That is why this one felt so severe, so sudden, so violent, even though a deeper quake of the same or larger magnitude might have barely rattled the windows. Shallow and hidden. That combination is exactly what caught this district off guard. So what happens after a fault like this breaks for the first time? Aftershocks. And a lot of them very quickly. Within just a few hours of the main quake, the seismologists had already recorded more than 50 aftershocks. And by later that morning, the count had climbed past 70, with the strongest reaching around magnitude 3.7. And because these aftershocks are also happening at shallow depth, people in the area feel them, each one a small, nerve-jangling reminder. Now here is the part that surprises people, and I want you to understand it so you're not frightened by it. One of the seismologists explained that this aftershock sequence could carry on regularly for about a week before it starts to taper off. But then he said something that stuck with me. He said that even years from now, they could still be recording earthquakes associated with this event. Just much, much smaller. That is not a warning that a bigger one is coming. It is simply how the Earth heals after a rupture. When a fault suddenly slips, the surrounding rock has to readjust to the new arrangement of stress, and it does that through a long, slowly fading series of smaller quakes that can trail on for months and even years. So if the people of Taumarunui keep feeling little tremors for a long time to come, well, that is the fault settling, not building. It is the ground exhaling slowly after holding its breath for 2 centuries. Now let me talk about the dangers that people forget. The secondary hazards, because these are often what actually causes harm, and this earthquake put 2 of them on full display. The first is landslides. The King Country is steep, hilly terrain, and at the time of the quake, the ground was already sodden and waterlogged from heavy rainfall. GeoNet specifically warned that they expected landslides around the epicenter, because when you take slopes that are already saturated and weak from rain, and then hit them with strong shaking, the ground can give way, and that is exactly what happened. Slips came down across the district, and at least 2 state highways were closed by them, though officials were honest that the heavy rain shared the blame with the shaking. This is a crucial thing to understand about earthquakes in rugged, wet country. The shaking itself might not flatten your house, but a hillside collapsing onto a road or above a home can be just as deadly. GeoNet even asked the public to report any landslides they saw, because tracking them helps the response teams find where the danger is. The second forgotten hazard is the one that, thankfully, did not materialize here. But it is worth understanding why. Was tsunami. When people hear strong earthquake near New Zealand, many immediately think of tsunami waves. But New Zealand's emergency agency confirmed there was no tsunami threat from this quake for one simple reason. It happened inland. A tsunami is generated when an earthquake violently shifts the seafloor, displacing a huge volume of water. This quake ruptured under land, well away from the coast, so there was no water to displace. And this is where the contrast with recent events becomes so striking. Just a week and a half earlier, a different magnitude 5.9 earthquake had struck down in the Fjordland region of the South Island. And because of its location, that one did prompt a tsunami warning and sent emergency agencies scrambling. Same magnitude, completely different threat, entirely because of where each one struck. It is a perfect illustration of why, in earthquake science, location can matter just as much as size. I do want to give you one clear piece of reassurance because it matters. Even though this quake struck near a volcanic region, the central North Island is home to some of the country's great volcanoes. The scientists were emphatic that this was a purely tectonic earthquake. It was rock breaking along a fault, not magma on the move. It is not a sign that any volcano is waking up or stirring. So if anyone tries to spin this into a volcanic doomsday story, you can set that aside. The experts who monitor those volcanoes around the clock have been clear. So let me bring this to the lesson, the thing I really want you to take away, because it applies to you no matter where on Earth you live. The story of the Taumarunui earthquake is the story of a hidden fault in a quiet place, striking for the first time in recorded history. And the message underneath it is both humbling and empowering. It is humbling because it tells us that even the experts, even in a country as prepared and well-studied as New Zealand, cannot point to a map and promise you where the next earthquake will not happen. The quiet ground beneath a peaceful town can hide a fault that has been loading in silence for thousands of years. But it is empowering too because it means the solution is simple and universal. You do not need to know exactly which fault will break or when. You just need to be ready for the possibility that it could. And being ready is not complicated. Secure your heavy furniture and your water heater to the walls so they cannot fall on you or your family. Keep a grab bag packed and easy to reach. Water, food, medications, a flashlight, a battery radio. Make a plan with the people you live with, where you will meet, how you will reach each other when the phone networks fail, because in a serious quake, they will. And learn the one action that saves more lives than anything else when the shaking starts. Drop, cover, and hold. Get down. Get under something sturdy and hold on until it stops. These small things cost you almost nothing, and they work whether the fault beneath you is famous or completely unknown. Here is the final thought, and it is the one that stays with me. We like to think we have the world mapped. We like to believe that danger comes with a warning, that the threats are all known and labeled and watched. But the Earth does not owe us that certainty. A fault can sit in silence beneath a sleeping town for the entire span of human record-keeping, and then, in a single early morning moment, remind an entire country that the ground is alive and that it keeps its own secrets. The people of Taumarunui came through this one with minor damage and, thankfully, no serious injuries, because New Zealand has built its homes and its culture around the reality of the shaking. That is the whole lesson. We cannot know every fault, we cannot predict the day, but we can choose in the quiet years to be the kind of people and the kind of communities that are ready when the quiet ground finally speaks. That choice is the one thing the Earth leaves entirely up to us. We are going to keep tracking every significant quake in New Zealand and along the whole Ring of Fire, so subscribe so you never miss what comes next, and drop that comment I asked for at the start. Have you ever been surprised by an earthquake, and did you feel this one? Because behind every fault line, known or hidden, are real people living their lives on top of a restless planet. And understanding it is how we all stay ready. Let us hit 5,000 likes on this one. Stay safe out there, look after the people around you, and I will see you in the next one.